Hey, welcome to the Athos Diet Podcast. We have another great guest on the podcast today, Josh Tyler, one of the co-founders of SavageGentleman.com. And what you'll find in our discussion, which lasted about an hour, is that Savage Gentleman is a dichotomy, sort of between East and West, between the warrior and the intellectual, between a father and the athlete, so on and so forth. So many comparisons could be made. But Josh Tyler, he's a really interesting guy. He has sort of the resume to prove the point that he is the savage gentleman. And he's a former school teacher who turned professional fighter, amateur survivalist. He's had a lot of eclectic sort of experiences, and all the while has been married over a decade, has two children, and I dare say one on the way. And he is what I would say also is just sort of a gentleman scholar, warrior, just all those things that he highlights. And we had the opportunity to talk about an hour today, and I welcome you to the podcast. Hey, so welcome to the Athos Diet Podcast. I'm Dr. Pete. I have a special guest here today that I'm very excited to get to know and sort of unpack a bit. I've been following you online for a little bit through Facebook and your website. And, what really resonates for me is the title. I just would love for you, Josh, to introduce yourself and tell us about the League of Savage Gentlemen. What an awesome name.
Thanks, man. So Josh Tyler, I've started a company with a buddy of mine called Savage Gentleman a few years back. And we started off as a podcast, and then we got into e-commerce, making leather goods and different products for either the Savage or the Gentleman. And we realized that the notion behind Savage Gentleman really started to resonate with people. And there's a need for community out there, right? A place where guys can connect, can learn from one another. And so we stood up our Savage Gentlemen as a Facebook group, as a place where we can digitally, virtually connect with others and kind of fill that void that we seem to be lacking in society. And there's no substitute for in-person things. However, technology is a tool, and we try to use it to the best of our ability. And that's where the League of Savage Gentlemen comes to play.
No, that's awesome. I think what's really cool about your concept is that it starts out as a philosophy, sort of a salve for something in society that you see as a gap that needs to be filled. And from that, you generate the how and the what. So in a certain sense, your first principle is a why, which I think is a very powerful thing to begin with. So, and that comes through very strongly on your website. When you read through your about page and what you're all about. I didn't realize that the podcast actually predates the company. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it was interesting. My partner and I, Matt, were working for another company, and at the time they were looking for just an outlet to talk about these things beyond just the survival preparedness side of things. That's kind of where their niche was.
Yeah.
And we realized man, there's a lot of other stuff that men need. Yes, we need to be more self-reliant. Yes, we need particular skills and things that we have to cultivate and develop on the physical side, but there's a mental side, there's a spiritual side that isn't really being tapped into very well. And so Savage Gentleman was kind of born out of the necessity to discuss those topics. And once we realized how powerful that was, we kind of took it and built it and grew it into our own thing. And now we've since branched off and become this entity. But yeah, it was just a podcast where we talked about man stuff, just all, either savage or gentleman, and ideally the combination of the two. And then it spurred from there as to, man, we can really do something with this, and at the time, nobody was paying us to listen to me run my suck. So from a business model, we're like, okay, well, how are we going to keep the lights on with this thing? So we started thinking about, all right, well, what kind of products, could we provide, and some handcrafted, American-made leather goods just seemed to fit the motif, right? The idea of this self-sufficient savage gentleman that can be both rugged and primal and yet refined and sophisticated. And leatherwork seemed to be that that medium to really express that dichotomy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Inspiring. I'll say this, it's almost like I mean, what is a brand really? In a certain sense, again, I feel like you've done it the right way. Oftentimes, the commercialized interpretation of a brand is something that sort of, I don't know, builds a reputation over time, but it really isn't promoting any sort of a movement. I almost feel like Savage Gentleman is, if you have certain principles that you believe in the well-rounded Renaissance guy who can be a father and a warrior and a athlete and also an office worker, whatever it takes, they wear Savage Gentleman gear. And
Right.
And so I think that mark of that mark is again, I like the sequence to which you start. And I think that probably is a marker of future success, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And for me personally, and I think other people have very different, certainly have different paths, and arguably they may have better paths in life. But for me, I have found that the things that just kind of grow organically, that come naturally, tend to bear the best fruit, right? For me personally, when I try to force something and go against what is naturally there, it seems to not work out as well, right? But as things transition, if I can kind of be in tune with that, my fighting career was very similar. Transitioning into wrestling was very similar, right? These kind of opened themselves up before me, and then I took the doors and walked through them, right? And Savage Gentleman was a very similar genesis where, yeah, it just made sense. But I think sometimes we get so entrenched in, like, I have to do this thing. We get stuck in these boxes and categories and these very limited perspectives. And all of a sudden, when you have a small box, man, you really find yourself bumping into walls really quickly, right? And so for me, kind of being able to step outside of that and taking a broader view has helped so far. Again, I would caution anyone to, like, follow me and what I'm doing, because I'm lost, right? Don't follow me. I'm lost. I don't really know where I'm going, but I have had some success, and this has kind of been the model that I followed, and so far it's been pretty decent. So I'm going to keep it up, to the listeners and those out there, viewer discretion advised, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, so is any great adventure, so is any great adventure or journey sort of has a certain degree of risk and the unknown. And so, I think what's awesome is that what you describe is sort of, each person's adventure that they need to journey through. And you're expressing something. I think what's interesting, the principle you bring up, almost it's like market forces versus like a dictatorship, like if every man just sort of dictated what he's going to do next, and he's going to do X no matter what, he's not really adapting to the environment, but if you kind of take a market approach where, obviously it's a combination of the skill set you have and the environment that you're in, the market speaks, and here's an opportunity, and that one that appears is probably more relevant and coherent than, let's say, the one that we sort of just delude ourselves into. But okay, so Savage Gentleman. So I just a little background about myself, and I only say this so we can talk further, about our common adventures here. But rugby is a sport I used to play a lot of, and the old common saying is it's a sport, it's a barbaric sport played by gentlemen. And then another quote is, I think it's Bruce Lee, something like, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And so I feel like your combination of Savage Gentleman just sort of resonates with both of that, those sort of labels. Tell me more about that dichotomy.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for us now in the modern era to kind of relegate ourselves to one thing or the other, right? There's a lot of savages in the world, certainly, and there's no shortage of gentlemen as well, but it's rare that you can find someone nowadays who can be both, right? And I think that's where the sweet spot really lies. And if you look, we have kind of a vintage inspired theme with our aesthetic, and
Sure.
and that's a lot of that stems from a bygone era where men by default were both savage and gentlemen. By necessity, you had to possess both qualities. You know, but we've evolved to such a state where you can kind of get by being one dimensional to some degree. But I think to reach the fullness of your being, right, your self-actualization, the fullness of your masculinity, if you will, you have to possess both qualities, and you need to be constantly pursuing each to kind of achieve that balance based off of whatever it is you're trying to be. Now, some guys are going to perfectly fine. Some guys, you know, like myself, like I'm never not going to be, you know, a knuckle jagging Neanderthal to some degree. Like that's just my predisposition. I spent, you know, 10 years of my life fist fighting for sport and money, you know? So yeah, that's I'm probably going to lean more on the savage side, and that's fine, but we can't neglect the opposition. And when we started talking about the savage gentleman idea, I realized, man, I had put down my gentleman tendencies, my creative side altogether. I was, as a fighter, I was really focused solely on destruction, right? That's the only thing that I really developed. And when I started doing video editing and content and writing again, I realized, man, there's a side of me that was very creative, that loved to do these things. I loved to draw, I loved music, I loved art, I loved all these things growing up. And then I kind of shelved them for a while. And when I started experiencing that again, I realized, man, there's a lot of stuff I've been missing out on. And that completeness, that fullness started to come together. And I realized there's probably a lot of other guys that have done that too, right? You know, for other guys, maybe it's the savage side they neglected. Maybe as a kid, they used to run around and play in the dirt, right? They used to tussle, they played sports, they did, you know, general savage things. But now, you know, they've got a wife, they've got kids, they've got a job, they wear a suit all day, they're in an office. Nothing wrong with that. But man, when's the last time you slept in the dirt? And I think if we can make sure we're tapping into both sides, not getting stuck into one or the other, I don't know, a lot of the problems that we're experiencing in the male population will maybe be alleviated. That's the theory, that's the thesis. You know, it's still being kind of tested out. But from my experience personally, what I've seen in others, that tends to be a bit of a remedy, right? If what you're doing currently is not working out for you in some way, maybe you should do something different, right? If being the gentleman has gotten you to where you are and you're unhappy, maybe you need a little bit more savage. Conversely, if being the savage is not panning out, maybe you need to interject some gentleman, right? Not, oh man, I just need to double down on my savagery. I guess I'm not savage enough. You know, I'm an isolated lone wolf out in the woods and no one wants to come around me. I guess I just need to be more savage. That's the problem. And we fall into that. I think it's easy to do. It's just like, man, I just need to do more of the same thing. But as we all know, that's the definition of insanity.
So you were saying, Josh, talking about this dichotomy, and you know, let me scale up for a moment. You know, I almost see it like sort of as a blend of East and West. You know, I see sort of the Western tradition as one where we get very focused, almost robotic, scientific, precise, exact, and there's some value in that. And then I see sort of a more Eastern tradition, which is more experiential, more in tune, let's say, with sort of first principles, nature, you know, like I said, experiential, mystical even. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel like if we go too far east or too far west, we lose something of ourselves. Perhaps right now we're in a more Western dominated sort of mindset. With that said, though, we also live in a very unique period of time. I mean, I'll say, if conceivably we've been around for millions of years, and in the last 100, we're able to like turn a thermostat and change the temperature for the first time in like human history to our liking. I mean, while the convenience is great, it's a very short experiment relative to human history. And so I feel like the entire realm of our dissatisfaction could kind of be blamed on that phenomenon of our reach for convenience and for creating sort of an environment that truly is without a lot of the worries and concerns and struggles and woes of let's say, our primitive selves. But at the same time, we definitely are so out of our normal environment. And I think we pay a cost for that.
You absolutely nailed it. I agree 100% with that. You know, comfort isn't a bad thing, right? The desire to seek out comfort is what has allowed our species to survive, right? Like if we didn't seek comfort, no one would have figured out how to make fire, right? And we would have just shivered to death and died. So it's good, and that's a natural driver, but we have to recognize that, you know, too much comfort is a bad thing, and that is what we're seeing. And it's easy to just get caught up in just the hustle and bustle and this, you know, constantly the ever-present desire for more productivity, right? Which is that Western mentality, which again, it's good. I mean, man, I can't knock it because we're talking to each other from thousands of miles away, right? It's an amazing thing, but we also have to realize, man, our animal, this animal organism, right, can't things are have allowed our technology to. So we have to bear that in mind. Maybe a few millennia, you know, a couple million years from now, we will have adapted and, you know, things will level off. And now we're a species that can handle, you know, traveling regularly in excess of 80 miles an hour. And, you know, the constant, the dopamine rush and serotonin drop of swiping through and looking at, you know, everything in existence at our disposal. But we're not there yet. And we have to recognize this thing is going to take time, and we have to be keenly aware. All right, well, yeah, maybe I don't have to, you know, pick up heavy things and put them down because, you know, I'm an accountant, right? I have a computer screen and I look at numbers. But just because your situation, your environment allows you to be that doesn't mean the organism it has adapted to that, right? And we have to look at ourselves like an organism, like an animal, and with, you know, thousands of years of evolution that have designed it a certain way. That I think we're going to run into some problems, and we see that. How many people, you know, are experiencing a lot of these issues that our predecessors never had time to deal with. Look, when you're running from saber-toothed cats and trying to hunt a mastodon, you don't have time to like be depressed or have anxiety or, you know, worry about a lot of these things, you know, worrying about your pronouns and all this stuff. And that may sound crass and you know, I'm not trying to be insensitive here, but I think some objectivity and some perspective is sometimes useful when we get caught up in this stuff.
You know, and this is me maybe being a bastard doctor, you know, to some extent, but I'll just tell you a case here. So I work in the emergency department, and I was working a night shift on, I think it was the eve, or basically the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And, you know, you can imagine, you know, airplanes dropping bombs, people having to live literally in the subway, I mean, running for their lives, et cetera. A very scary time for people. Well, I was in the emergency department. We were hearing about the news. It was really sad. And then I had this guy who was like, I don't know, just a young gentleman who had his whole life ahead of him, who was in room 15, crying, angry, upset, pissed off, wouldn't interact with me, with the nurses, just very upset. And it became very clear that this was all, let's call a psychiatric issue, but it was more on the mood disorder side. This guy wasn't psychotic. He was just really deep within his woes and his struggles, and he listed many of them. And I left the room, and one of the nurses asked me, wow, that guy just sounds, I mean, I haven't been in the room yet, doc, but he just sounds terrible. What's wrong with him? And I said, oh, he just found out that his family died in the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, which is not true at all, okay? My point is that, like, where's the freaking perspective? Like, oh my God, you know, and I'm not trying to minimize what this gentleman was going through, but I do think though that tragedy and struggle to some extent keep us very sober, give us a great deal of perspective. And that is a challenge. It's like, how do you create that almost artificially, that sense of urgency, struggle, necessity, resource limitation in a society of excess and convenience? And one of the pitches for my book I wrote about a diet called the Athos diet is that through intermittent fasting, you know, I kind of create this feast and famine concept in the daily life of my you know, clients, patients, and followers, family, whatever you want to call it. So through that knowledge, we create a lifestyle that mimics our old conditions and people feel better, and their bodies show it. They feel better. So I think that's the task of the West. It's like, well, if you can literally be available 24/7 by phone or by email or Zoom or whatever, you got to set limitations, and however artificial they are, there are important rules and important parameters to set up for yourself, for your own mental health, if not your physical health.
Yeah, and really it comes down to simply just intentionality, right? And some measure of discipline as well, right? You mentioned we live in a place of excess, right? We do, and we have never had more and better than we have today, despite how terrible some people may think the world is currently. And I'm not going to sugarcoat. Yeah, there's some stuff that's really shitty right now, no question, right? But on the whole, you know what I mean? If you look at the human race,
sure,
and especially for those of us living in America, man, if you had to pick a time on the timeline, you could do a lot worse, let's just say.
Yeah.
And so we have to recognize that, yeah, we could fall into that trap. You could literally stuff your face with,
right,
as many calories as you could get your hands on, right? You can consume as much media as you want. You
right,
can buy as many things as you could wish to fill your house in. But none of that is really useful after a certain point. And we have to recognize, okay, when have I reached the point of excess and I'm no longer in the level of utility? And understanding if I go beyond that, it's going to start to come at a cost. It's going to come at a cost to my physical health, to my mental health, again, to my spiritual health. All of these things, and I think we just take for granted. We have been conditioned, again, not to beat up on Western society too bad, but I think it is a very strong, Western mantra of more is more, more is better, right?
But again, it's a brief experiment, I mean, even to the extent, like, I remember hearing my uncle years ago talking about, that guy, he's just not street smart. He doesn't know how to work Wall Street and make investments. And I'm like, who knows anything about Wall Street and make investments? I mean, it's so emotionally driven. There's a crash every 10 years. Every financial account that's out there will just say in the good years, it's due to my knowledge and wisdom. And then the bad years say, hey, it's just the market. And I'm not trying to say that there isn't some tricks you can pull. I mean, obviously there are hedge funds that make a lot of money, but I feel like to some extent, the old adage of save up for it and then spend the money, or at least live within a budget, or a wealthy man is a person who makes more than he spends. I mean, this type of ancient wisdom, this meaningful wisdom, I think is much more time tested than however flashy the last 100 years have been. I've never met so many depressed people, and I think one of the saddest statistics I came across was since World War II in the United Kingdom, more people have died from suicide in the last half a century than they have in any armed conflict since. So
Wow.
I mean it's super sad. And I what do you do about all of that? We could expand, but I feel like the savage gentleman is kind of like part of the answer. It's exactly what you say. You get too unidimensional and you don't allow enough inputs from all sides. You can really feel hollow. Just tell me, Josh, about your family life. Have you been married for a while? Do you have a number of kids? I saw one.
Yeah. So been married for going on 11 years now. We've got 2 kids and one on the way potentially, which is exciting. So yeah, my oldest is 7. The little guy who just came in here, he's 4. And so yeah, we are living out here in the countryside now, out in Virginia.
Virginia, okay.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So my wife and I were born and raised here in Virginia, and then I moved out west to Salt Lake City, Utah. We were there for about 10 years for my fighting career, and we just recently moved out here, got a little bit of land, and so I've been trying my hand at some gardening and that sort of thing, which has been really, honestly, very rewarding and fulfilling. I mean, we'll see how fruitful it is come harvest season, but stuff's in the ground and it's growing. So far, so good.
Sure. No, that's amazing. I heard once actually that if you took every human being and you gave them an acre of land in like Texas, every person could like grow enough food to sustain themselves. Speaking of, overpopulating the world, I guess it's it's a sham of a concept. But I love the idea that you have, your next move was to own property and enough land to grow something. I mean, I feel like it's at least a valuable exercise, if not something we can fall back on as we lose 35% of the world's wheat supply in the next several weeks. It's kind of doomsday-ish lately. I don't want to be negative. I'm not negative by default, but it's great to hear you're growing something.
Well, I think, man, everything has an ebb and flow, and it is really easy to look at circumstances right now. And I mean, man, if you are someone who habitually watches the news, you can't help but feel like, well, we had a good run, man. This is all going to come crashing down any minute now. And, I can't say one way or the other, but, I think like most things, there's a pendulum that swings, and however far it goes in one direction, it has to come back. And so what it feels like is happening now is, all right, we have pushed the needle too far in one direction. Mm-hmm. And whether we like it or not, it's heading the other way, right? How far it goes, how drastic, how negative that is in our lives, I don't know. I think a lot of that will depend on how open-minded we can be and how adaptable we are, right? But we are seeing it. There's a huge movement of people, kind of getting into this notion of homesteading, of being more tied into the land and with nature, to kind of shun the corporatism that we've been, facilitating for however many decades now, right? I think a lot of people realize, like, man, there's better things to do with my life. There's better time spent than punching a clock for some faceless entity who doesn't give, a damn about who I am and my well-being. I'm a replaceable cog in a wheel, right? And, again, there's been a lot of great stuff that has stemmed from capitalism. And I own a capitalist business, so I'm not poo-pooing it at all. But again, I think perspective is important. I think understanding that, man, there's limitations to that, and we should probably also, just like with Savage Gentleman, maybe pay attention to the other side of the coin, right? Maybe not be so reliant on all of these other systems that are beyond our control. Maybe take back to the autonomy that, humans have thrived off of for, ever since we started walking the planet.
Sure.
I think that's a big part of it. And that is a huge mantra of the Savage Gentleman, is that notion of autonomy, of self-reliance, of, man, being able to fend for yourself. Because if you can't do that, what can you do?
Yeah, and speaking of which, because again, I think everything you're stressing is always that dichotomy. So, homestead life, appreciate the capitalistic market, but let's not go too extreme in sort of corporate institutions. We have to hone those in. Let me ask you this: if you had to give your son some advice for a wholesome life, what does that include? And I asked that question intentionally because I feel like we've gone so extreme in the opposite spectrum of no one wants to define any parameters. We don't know what the cocktail is for a good life, and so people kind of go flying out into the ether looking for everything, find nothing. Much time passes, and then they might just find, like in The Alchemist or many other books, the whole concept of kind of coming back to your roots, that the old recipe isn't a bad one. So what categories does the Savage Gentleman sort of discuss? I know that you guys have a lot of discussion on the Facebook news thread, but what categories do you specifically try to address that are relevant to the Savage Gentleman?
Oh, that's great, man. So as far as living a wholesome life, I mean, I think you're right. We do tend to live in a very culturally ambiguous time period, right? Where we can't even define what an actual man is, let alone what is a woman, what is a man? Nobody knows, apparently, right? So then to attach another adjective, well, what is a good version of that is even more, right? So yeah, I mean, it is a problem, and I think we do need to find some set of morals to adhere to. I think, or principles, right? I think that's kind of where where that starts from. You need some kind of a reference point to define what is even good, what is right from wrong, right? So a level of morality, I think, is a really good jumping off point. And depending on your background, there's a lot of different thoughts out there. There's a lot of different beliefs. I stem from, more traditional Christian belief myself in terms of right and wrong, good or bad. But, I think truth is truth. And eventually, no matter where you start, you're going to arrive kind of to a similar conclusion, right? I think that there's, for as ambiguous as society is, if we really got down to it, we could pretty well nail down right from wrong. You know what I mean? Maybe not on the internet, maybe not in a Twitter discussion, but a face-to-face, person-to-person, I think for the most part, we can agree to some very broad terms of that. So defining that set of morals and principles, I think is a good place, right? And then pursuing them with conviction and ensuring that you don't allow anything to violate those for you, right? Don't allow yourself to do something that compromises those beliefs. It is a good start. I mean, I think that in itself is wholesome. And from there, that expands out and you can start applying that to other aspects of your life. I mean, one of the things that has helped me is, to be more wholesome and for my life to be more enjoyable. And this is a recent development, is to stop chasing money. I had notions of this business of Savage Gentleman growing to, massive size and becoming something that I could just completely retire on and never have to worry about finances again. And so every second of every day was focused on this. And I was so narrow in my scope of view that I was missing everything else around me. And it wasn't until I had a really heartfelt discussion with my wife about where we were going and what was most important for our family that I realized, man, I have really been missing the forest for the trees, right? And when I made that shift, my marriage got better, my relationship with my kids got better. Strangely enough, my business got better. Mm-hmm. And again, it's kind of this forcing mentality where we think we can just control everything. And sometimes we have to let go and realize the only thing we can control is ourselves, right?
Well,
and how we interact with things.
Yeah, no, well said, well said. And I think also it's valuable to say that I think God engineered the world, as Emerson says, the sun shines on the poor and the rich. I mean, I think the bar has been set so that with a sober, sort of consistent routine, every human being on earth more or less can hone in and have a little piece of paradise, which probably includes a spouse, some kids, a job with an identity, a beer in the evening, however you want to describe it. But it's a simple cocktail. I mean, you don't have to be an oligarch from Russia in a super yacht, that's valued 150 million to reach the meaning of life. It seems to be that we can grasp the meaning of life at a very relatively low economic level. And I think there's studies to prove that. I think it wasn't too long ago, someone came out with a calculation that showed that return on investment for salary sort of peaks at 75,000. And after that in America, it's like Kobe beef. I mean, like you might spend 10 times as much money for Kobe beef, but it's only like 50% more delicious,
or maybe even less. Yeah. The diminishing returns for sure.
Diminishing returns, so I feel like a lot of life is that way. And at the same time, it's important, I think, to kind of go back to that Hobbiton, Lord of the Rings perspective of just find, good food, good company, and a group, a night out with the guys is actually quite valuable.
I love so much that you just made a Lord of the Rings reference. And if you could define my life goals now, truthfully, it is to continually become more Hobbit-ish.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
In every way possible, right? And again, that doesn't mean that I'm weak and I'm feeble and I do nothing and I just sit around, right? I mean, if we really take that analogy to its core, it's like, yeah, Bilbo wasn't the biggest, the strongest, but man, he did express courage when it came down to it, and he was willing to fight. And maybe he wasn't super jacked out of his mind, and he wasn't shredded or whatever. He wasn't a black belt in jujitsu, but like he did what he needed to do. And obviously it's a fantasy tale and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of good lessons from that. And again, I think that balance and pursuing a life worth living is really important. And I don't feel like sitting in a cubicle or staring at this computer screen night and day, looking at numbers and trying to find, squeeze every little ounce, out of our marketing and finance or whatever.
Yeah.
To me, it isn't worth it. And, there are far better and they're going to be more successful businessmen out there. There already are. And I realize I don't need to be that guy. The value that I bring is way less tied to the economics of my business and my finances, and way more tied to the value that I bring to my family and my friends and just the people that I interact with. And if I'm so focused on, this business thing, I can't be that guy, right? I can't be both. Maybe other people can, and good for you. I realize though, I can't be. Something has to give. And if I'm focused on, zeros and ones all the time, I kind of become a shitty human. It makes me a less effective father and husband and friend. And when I let go of that, when everything isn't about, cash flow, man, it is incredible. And I say that because I'm in a comfortable position. I'm fortunate and I'm blessed enough to where, my situation isn't so dire that, well, hey man, I have to be crushing it every second of every day. So, that's not lost on me. I know there are other people that have to hustle and they have to grind, and there's nothing wrong with that. But man, I don't think that should be your lifelong goal, is to do that indefinitely. I think as soon as you can get out of that trench, do so, whether that's changing your situation and living closer to your means. Maybe that
you were mentioning about this cocktail and sort of getting it right. And if you hone in on and become too much of a, here's a problem, I'm going to solve that, and just focus in on that unidimensional thing, you can lose a lot out. And you were getting into some great content. Sorry for resetting.
No, not a problem. And so, what I realized and what came to mind, I don't know, are you familiar with the parable of the fisherman and the businessman?
Oh yeah, with him. Yes, and he keeps scaling up.
So he's sitting there and he's taking a nap, right? And
sure.
The business. Well, look, if you do this, you can do more. Well, what I want to do that for? Well, then you would have time. You could just take a nap and relax. Yeah. I'm already doing that,
right?
And so that, I have to bear that in mind when I start getting a little too jazzed up of like, I'm already doing the thing, and that's not to say, okay, well, just don't plan for the future and, and again, this is Western and Eastern philosophy, right? Where they are somewhat in conflict, right? Because Eastern philosophy would tell you that nothing matters but the here and now, to only be present always. Okay.
Right.
That is useful, but also like, there are real things that I need to be concerned with. There's retirement. There's, if I was just present, then I wouldn't be, we would never plant crops that are going to get us through the winter, because I have food now. What do I care about 6 months from now? So
yeah, sort of a micro of that.
Yeah. So, again, it's like you mentioned, it's taking and blending both, right? And I think if we often get too dogmatic, right? We find a system that resonates, we find an idea that we like, and it seems to work. And so we just pursue that to the exclusion of everything else, right? And I think, again, we start running into walls and we start running into problems. And we need to look, we can't take everything that's out there and assimilate it, but man, maybe start looking for some different options when you're running into problems, not more of the same. That's kind of my advice.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Something that's sort of related to that, or I think like a cousin to what you're bringing up, is this idea of sort of regional versus global. I think what's happened is we've become too hyperbolic about like the greatest basketball player. We only want to see LeBron James play, no one else. And really historically, we had like, the fastest guy in the town, the strongest buddy in the region, like boy in the farm, valley. I mean, in that sense, we've taken away our local heroes. And I think that really, we've suffered a lot for that. In my opinion, I love to travel, I love to see the world. Who doesn't? Like you said, adventure. I think that's part of being a savage gentleman. But at the same time, being sort of that local go-to person who has a little something that they can bring to the table. And the fact that we've created sort of these freak shows. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't something to be said about being the greatest, but at the same time, like there's this interesting statistic. I think 100 actors at any one time are known by name by the general public. Nevertheless, there's like almost 300,000 registered actors in America. I mean, there's only 100 spots. There's only 100 spots. And it's not to say these other people don't have great talent, but those people need to be in their local theaters. They need to be acting stuff out. And to that point, I just went to like a Broadway show, Broadway level show of like our local high school not so many months ago. It was amazing. They did Matilda. I was like, where do these kids come from? They're like in high school. Now, are any of them talented? Absolutely. Are any of them by statistic probability going to become the next, Hugh Jackman? Probably not. And, and I just feel like we've set up a lot of these concepts for our kids, or my generation in particular, like the millennials in particular. You can be whatever you want. And if you're at all unhappy during your workday, there's something else that you should be doing. And it's just not true. And it's sobering and it's humbling, but I feel like people have to stop trying to be, one of the 100 actors and just be someone who enjoys acting and pay your bills and pull that off. And not to say we don't have great aspirations, bigger, better is all, why not? But I wouldn't subvert everything else in life for that lottery ticket.
That's the paradox, right? And we're really bad at as a society at trying to hold two conflicting ideas as both being true, right? And I think this is where the problem stems, right? And to your point, should we do our best and have lofty goals and work our asses off to achieve greatness, right? And strive for that number one position? Absolutely. And should we applaud the person that has made it there and respect them and revere them? Yes. At the same time, should we also be happy and content with what we are doing based off of our, effort and our capability, and that's also yes. And should we also commend those who are, striving and working, even though maybe they're not the number one spot? They're like, you should be able to recognize, success, even if it's moderate, right? And so either what we fall into is either, okay, now, well, then fine, you're just participation trophy. Everyone's awesome. And so therefore nobody's awesome, right? Is the naysay. Or you fall into, okay, if you ain't first, you're last, a Ricky Bobby kind of thing where nothing matters except for number one. And the truth is they are both equally valid, and we need to be able to hold those simultaneously, right? And if we can do that, we can recognize, and this is hard. I'm not saying I have the answer, I have it all figured out. It's something that I struggle with myself, where it's like, man, I need to hold myself in enough self-regard to like not hate who I am and be self-loathing, right? I have to acknowledge my own value and worth, while at the same time acknowledging, okay, I still have somewhere to go or some room to grow, and improvements to make, while not being depressed that I'm not number one, and not being so complacent that I stop working to do anything. And that really is the trick, right? If you can find that balance between those two spaces, I think you'll be much more fulfilled. But I think people tend to fall on one side or the other. They're miserable because they're not the number one or top 100 household actor. They're not a YouTube famous influencer, right? And so, well, I guess I'm just a POS then. Or they're completely hopeless. They've given up. Well, it's impossible. There's 300,000 actors and only 100 of them are ever going to be famous. So what's the point? And they just kind of sink into this, depressed state of underachievement.
And
that's
again,
kind of where we find ourselves.
No, absolutely. And what's sad is that, as a society, we've kind of created our towns and our cities to reflect that priority, so that you no longer have as many local, regional competitions or sports, or it's interesting how we sort of project our priorities onto society, and eventually the architecture, the layout, the zoning reflects that. And I think to our detriment. I think that ideally it's a great economic strategy to be as global as possible, to be able to market to as many people as possible to buy your product. But at the same time, though, we live in a zip code, and we have people that we fall in love with that occupy space in our home. And, we just have to make sure that we don't lose sight of, like you said, what's sort of local and around us, at the expense of like a delusion of something far away. And so I think sometimes we can get caught up in that paradigm, especially for people who really do have exceptional talent. Like I said, going back to the actors, it like breaks my heart, every time I hear about someone that went for it, that truly have amazing talent, but they, luck, destiny. I like to say this is sort of a contrarian thing. I believe that, success in a certain sense is 99% effort and 1% destiny. So I don't mean to say that 99% is like, oh, I make my own destiny. No. I'm saying that truly you have to put in your 99%, and then there's something destiny that just gets you into those 100 spots or into that limelight. And it's not to say there aren't lots and lots of people who didn't put in that 99%. But the idea that, hey, if I was just good enough, I could also be a Hugh Jackman, it's just not statistically possible. It's not statistically possible.
No, and I think what happens is, we too easily assign our self-worth to these outcomes, right? And I've suffered from that. I've been guilty of that. I mean, as a professional athlete, right, I had incredibly lofty aspirations, and I, out of that 99% effort, I can honestly say that that's where I was. I mean, I feel very confident in my talent and ability and that sort of thing, but that 1% destiny didn't quite come through, So, I mean, I fought on, a high level stage. I fought around the world, but I'm not a household name. I'm not one of the top, 10 UFC fighters that just roll off of your tongue that you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm not, but that was part of the goal. And, every year.
Imagine we're living like 10,000 years ago. I mean, there's Josh Tyler and his tribe, man. Like, don't screw with that group.
Yeah.
He's this, don't go to his side of the mountain. This guy will rip you apart. I mean, there's value in that. And that's where I feel like, your tribe would have built you up, would have praised you, respected you. And obviously we do that in our way now. But I'm just saying is, there is obviously incredible value in success and what you've achieved. It's just in terms of like getting to that that height. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just destiny. It's just destiny. And I'm sure if we put you in the ring with, Pierre, what's his name? Pierre George. PSP. I'm sure you could have held your own, man. I mean, I'm sure you could have held your own. Did you ever have an opportunity to fight him? Who, we never knew. We never knew.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things, and I have no shame in admitting that I guarantee GSP would run circles around me. That guy.
I'm just
one
saying.
of the best dudes ever. But I mean, I've trained with world-class athletes, and I have been competitive with world-class athletes. So I mean, I know and understand, my capability in that realm, and I'm okay with that, and I wouldn't change anything about that. Honestly, I would, even if I had the opportunity to go back and, okay, here's the turning point, win this fight, go on to become world champion, lose it, go, go on your life path.
Mhm.
I can't say that I would take that left instead of the right. I think that I would still pursue, because I'm where I am today, and I'm very happy with where I am today. I wouldn't change anything about it. I think we just need to figure out how to draw that self-worth and that value, independent of the what we achieve, right? Our achievement, and while at the same time continuing to pursue things and not just give up because, like, well, I love myself and that's all that matters, and I'm perfect the way I am, so I'm just going to exist now. I don't think that's the correct thing either. And again, so it's a paradox, right? These are very conflicting ideologies that we have to hold simultaneously, which makes no sense, and it's why it's so freaking hard for anyone to do.
And that's why you distill down that philosophical dilemma into the savage gentleman. I mean, it just knocks it out of the park. I do want to say that UFC fighter, SGP or whatever he calls himself,
DSP, yeah.
He exited the sphere. I mean, he doesn't fight anymore, and the guy is a very well-rounded individual.
No, I mean, he went out essentially on his terms. There was maybe some weirdness. I don't know. There was some mental stuff, and again, I can appreciate that when your identity is tied so closely to a certain thing like that, and you walk away from it, you can't do anything but expect there to be some friction, right, in that transition. And you see it in guys when they retire from a career, guys that are exiting the military. Like, you have to know, and I think we do a poor job of preparing people that, like, man, it's going to be hard. You're going to have a few years of working through some stuff, the process, not just, okay, well, I'm done fighting. Never think about that again. Never have any issues, or, the whatever demons maybe got me to going down this path, they're never going to resurface again. That's not how that works, but we kind of just gloss over that, and we don't prepare people for these transitions. And so, yeah, he had a little bit of weirdness, and I think he's still involved in the sport, and I'm sure he's doing quite well for himself. And yeah, I think he did ultimately make a good transition. And, you have to realize, no matter how good you get at a thing, especially if it's physically related, there's a lifespan to that, right? There's a short window where you're no longer going to be number one. And that's the thing we have to recognize. Like, yes, could you potentially be number one at something? Absolutely. But you'll never be number one for all time.
Right.
And you have to accept that fact. And if you can't, man, you're going to be woefully disappointed and incredibly unhappy.
Well, I think that timeline is so important to recognize as well, because, we're always battling with our future selves. And, one of the great rugby players is Jonah Lomu. He's this New Zealander who was just a monster on the field, but he was a monster on the field in like 20 years ago. Now, like, everyone's a monster, on the field. But he was a change maker in his own way. And I like to think, he actually died very tragically from some autoimmune kidney diseases and in a very sort of sad state of mind. And to think that gentleman who was so successful and such a change maker for the sport would end in that way, it just goes to show that there's just no guarantee. And I think the only salve for any of that is a very well-rounded life with a lot of inputs and wholesomeness that you can kind of lean on and explore as life changes. So Josh, so let me ask you this, just to kind of bring it back to your company here for a little bit. And again, I think your work is awesome in that you're able to kind of translate these philosophies into clothing and into podcasts and into media and whatnot. I think we do need more of a community for men out there to participate in that. So what's the status of the company? How are things going? Do you have a lot of employees? How's the supply chain? Like, where are things headed?
Yeah, it's going well. We have a little bit. Obviously, the past couple of years have been kind of interesting, to say the least. Yeah. We had opened up a retail store inside of a mall, and that started off going fairly well. And about 6 months into that, and kind of figuring out, because that was uncharted territory, COVID hit and people stopped leaving their house.
Sure.
So obviously that that was a bit of a speed bump
For everyone,
for
ubiquitously. Yeah.
everyone. And
Yeah.
so we kept the retail space and just used it mostly as for manufacturing our products and for our shipping and fulfillment, but it's incredibly small. And so, when we realized, okay, well, it doesn't seem like the retail is going to come back, because at least for us, it didn't. Then we had, by that time we had outgrown our space. So we just now finally made a transition to a larger facility, and to where we can actually manage and ship things, and we're not just boxes packed on each other. And that took a little bit longer. We had to kind of, for lack of a better term, minimize the store and what we were selling while we got everything set up. Because and I feel bad. We had some people who got caught in that transition, and they had to wait a lot longer than they should have to get their stuff. But it was a massive undertaking, and we tried to be as upfront, but still, you never want to let someone down. You never want to take someone's money and then not deliver the thing. You know what I mean? They're just sitting waiting like, hey man, it's been a month. Is this wallet ever going to show up? We finally got that squared away. We're back up and running. And so now we're just trying to feel out the landscape and really, get a better understanding of what the market looks like. It's a little bit trickier now to sell people a $500 goat's wage jacket, and that $500 is going to fill up one tank of gas for them. It's a little bit harder sell. So we're kind of rethinking a little bit what we're pushing. I mean, we're still going to carry high-end luxury goods, but I think shifting the focus to be obviously still product oriented from a business model. But I think what's more necessary now is maybe delivering on the philosophy side. I think what people need more of is less goods and more service, right? I think people need more guidance, if anything. And yeah, if you want to pick up a t-shirt, if you're in the market for a wallet or a leather punching bag or whatever it is, great, we'll be here, we'll have those things. But for me personally, I feel more compelled to talk about these ideas, to get it out there and hopefully help steer guys in a more positive direction, because man, we all know there's things could be better in the world of men today. When you look at the statistics across the board, man, the numbers aren't looking great in almost any category, right? If you look at suicide, if you look at mental health, if you look at physical health, all of these markers are kind of going the wrong direction. And I don't know the answers necessarily, but if nothing else, I'd like to be a resource to try and help. You know what I mean? Again, I don't have much figured out, but I do know that having conversations help. Shifting guys' thinking and mentality can help. Just knowing that there's someone out there who gives a shit, right, helps, I think. And so that's kind of the direction that I'm wanting to push more towards. We're pulling back a little bit from giving Facebook and Instagram all of our marketing dollars, and trying to do a little bit more organic approach and kind of a grassroots thing. And hopefully, that will, again, kind of the organic mentality of a life path of man, let's not force the issue. Let's find ways to naturally let it go. And yeah, sometimes you gotta fan the flame a little bit to get it to grow. But I think I don't know. I don't think lining Zuckerberg's pockets is the way of the future anymore, at least not for our company.
Yeah, well, once again, I like to stress, if I'm hearing you correctly, really what you're selling is not apparel. It's a movement, a philosophy, a community of people that as a result of that support, then sort of brand themselves as the Savage Gentleman, which I just think is so powerful. Question for you, and we'll end it on this note. If you had three podcasts that you had to recommend, which ones do you watch, or which ones would you put out there? Just curious.
Oh man, one of the ones that it's kind of under the radar, and I'm partial to it because they're friends of mine and I've been on it a few times. But the conversations are some of the deepest and most profound that I've been fortunate enough to have, and not just the ones that not these episodes I was involved with, but all of them are very deep and very I think useful in framing an ideology, and so it's the nonprofit podcast, but it's so it's profit with a PH is the name of it. Started by my friend Mark Twite and Blevins. The two of them own an entity, and their philosophy around exercise and fitness and diet and that sort of thing. And I think you would really appreciate it, being given your profession. That's a pretty big one. I really like what they're doing over there. I would say that, maybe again, I'm a bit partial, but the Savage Gentleman podcast is sometimes okay to listen to. I will never rank us in the highest quality of like audio and video. On the technology side, we could probably be better, and that's something that I'm working on. But I think in terms of the conversation, much like what we've had here, I think that they're generally pretty good and pretty helpful. And
you know what it was, Josh? I was just pegging you as a Jordan Peterson guy on for podcasts. Perhaps with a little bit of Joe Rogan, maybe some Lex Friedman.
No, I like both of those guys, but I'll be honest, I'm not an avid podcast listener.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I will occasionally, but I'm probably more reflective and contemplative than I am just sit and study kind of guy, if that makes sense, right? Like consuming something else. Like I get a lot through conversation and experience, and then I kind of sit and I reflect on it. And that's the way I learn. And occasionally I'll pepper in, some reading or some listening. I like those guys a lot. I mean, I think they've got really good ideologies, and I've listened to snippets. I don't know that I've ever listened to a full Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And again, I just feel like I'm always curious to know when you meet an ally, kind of where their network streams. So Josh, it's been great. If I had one last question, where can people find your good work online?
Yeah, well, they can. I don't know about good work, but they can find what we do. SavageGentleman.com is the website, and gentleman with an MAN singular. And Savage Gentleman Official on Instagram is where you can find us. We just took the plunge into the TikTok realm, which is, again, something I've been resistant to, but sometimes you got to adapt to the landscape, right? And so actually I'm letting my business partner, Matt, handle that completely. That's his baby. So if it's awesome, you can thank him. If it's terrible, you can blame him for that. I don't even know what we're listed under, but we do exist on TikTok now, apparently. We've got the Facebook page. We've got the closed Facebook group called the League of Savage Gentlemen, which you mentioned. So you can request to join there. Just answer the question. We've got 2 very simple questions for anyone who wants to join. And then if you want to see what I'm up to, all of my social media is under Josh Tyler MMA, and that's Instagram and Facebook and that sort of thing. And a little bit different flavor. I try to separate, business life with personal life. Obviously there's bleed over, but they're very similar, but there's some things that I just don't think quite fit within a business. You might not know this about me, but I don't really take myself that seriously. So some of my more silly antics and shenanigans live on my personal page because they're probably not the best for a business, at least in my mind. I don't know. It's always changing. So maybe we'll get weirder on Savage Gentleman too. Who knows?
Well, Josh, you come across very genuine. I appreciate the work that you're doing and how you kind of distill it down into a business. But I've very much enjoyed our hour together, and I will post this online, and I hope we can have more conversations in the future.
Yeah, likewise. We'd love to have you on and do our podcast. We can chat some more. I mean, it's when you have ideas and you think and probably overthink too much, you wonder like, man, am I just some kind of weirdo that just spends too much time, you know, thinking about these things? And when you run into someone that gets it and understands and
Sure.
apparently is, along that same wavelength, an ally, as you put it, which I really like, it's very reassuring. Like, okay, I'm not just some weirdo sitting in the woods, just, contemplating life.
No,
There's a lot of other people that I think are seeing some of the same things, which means hopefully there's some truth to it.
absolutely. I think the segment of the market that you're honing in on is about 50% of the population, so men all over the world need to hear more of your work and your perspective. And I think it's for their own benefit, really, as we put our minds, souls, and bodies in the right orientation. Josh, thanks so much for your time. And until next time, I really appreciate getting to chat with you. It means a lot to me.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it, man.